So welcome, Neale. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast again.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you. How may I serve the moment?
So I have a couple of questions.
Okay, only two questions. We'll be done in 3 minutes.
It's a long list. So we're going to talk about your book, GodTalk. It's your 40th book. So tell us what makes GodTalk so special and how is it different compared to your other books?
Well, first of all, it starts with how the book even came to be. Most authors, including myself in my first 39 books, will write a book and then hope that they can find a publisher. But in this case, a publisher actually called me. That's never happened before in my life. But my phone rang and a publisher called me and said, "Would you be willing to write a book for us?" So this is a book that was requested by a publishing company. And I said, "Well, what did you have in mind?" And they said, "We would like you to write a book helping people understand how they could have their own conversation with God, the way you claim that you had one." I said, "Well, okay, I can't guarantee that anyone will have the same experience, but I can certainly share with them how I had my experience, and maybe it might be helpful to them." So I sent my writing in. It took me about 2.5 or 3 weeks to finish writing the book, and I sent it to them. And then they did something unusual. They went online and they invited the audience of the internet. Please send in, if you think that you've ever had a divine intervention in your life from God, send us your story. And they told me that they received hundreds of emails from people saying that God also intervened in their life. So then they picked out 8 or 9 of the best stories and put those in the book as well, because they wanted to make the point that it's not just this particular person who's having a conversation with God, but that people all over the world are having the same kind of experience, each in their own lives, so that people would understand that it's not just about one human being. So they chose to title the book God Talk, and it was experiences of people, with a higher power. So what makes it, I'm not sure that it's any more special than any of the other books, but it's different in the sense that it contains the first clues that I have given with regard to how a person could have their own conversation with God, in a direct experience of God in their life. So I hope that's been helpful to people. Those who have read it have told me that they've really found some helpful information inside the book. So I'm glad to hear that.
So can anyone talk with God? And is
Well,
God is
anyone but you, because you're not worthy of it. But anyone else but the other 8.5 billion people can speak with God, but you cannot, Amandeep, because you're not worthy of God speaking directly to you.
so how do I become worthy?
I tell a joke like that to make a point. Most people do not think they're worthy, really. Most people ask, would God actually talk to me? Here's what's interesting, Amandeep. Most people who believe there is a God, and that's, by the way, not everybody, but probably 8 out of 10 people believe that there's some sort of higher power exists. So, but most people who believe that there is some sort of higher power believe that God did talk at one point talk directly to human beings, talk to Moses, talk to, Jesus, talk to Muhammad, bless his holy name, probably worked through the Buddha and others, talk to Mother Mary, talk to Julian of Norwich or Teresa of Avila, talk to men and women throughout human history. So they believe that God has spoken directly to people, but they wonder whether God would speak directly to, ordinary people. I mean, maybe if you're the Pope, okay, fair enough. Or if you're the head ulama or the chief rabbi or somebody with some kind of credential, some kind of spiritual, authority or spiritual credential. But would God speak to ordinary people like you and like me? And of course, the answer is yes, that God is speaking to all of us all the time. But because we don't want to be ridiculed or maybe marginalized, we call God, that is, most people call God's conversations. Most people call communications from the divine something else. They say maybe they had a psychic hit, or they call it an epiphany, or they call it a brilliant insight that hit me, when I was standing in the shower, or they say it was women's intuition, or they find some other way to describe the same experience that I had, which is receiving information from a source that feels as if it's outside of yourself. Turns out that it's inside of all of us, that we're not calling it forth from above, we're calling it forward from inside of all of us. So the answer to the question is we can all have conversations with God, and we are all having conversations with God all the time. We're simply, as I said, in some cases, calling it something else.
So is God actually or really listening to us?
Well, she's listening to everybody but you, but because you don't deserve to be listened to, but she's listening, and not even to me, because I don't deserve. If you don't deserve, then I certainly don't deserve, because you're a better person than I will ever be. So the two of us are in trouble. But God is listening to everybody else. Wait a minute. Let me see. I'm getting a phone call here. Oh, I know. I'm telling her, but I'm just joking with her. She knows I'm just fooling. I'm just joking. Okay. Okay. Thank you. He said, don't joke around like that because people will think that you're serious. So the answer is yes, God speaks to all of us all the time.
So in God Talk, you share some true stories of people talking with God, ordinary
Yes.
people. um, and so why is sharing our experiences of God talking to us important?
Because it helps people who don't think they've had such an experience to accept and embrace the reality of what's really going on. Most people have had moments when something became clear to them out of the blue. Just, all of a sudden they suddenly understood something, or they suddenly felt a level of compassion for someone else, or they suddenly felt that they really needed to forgive and forget, or they needed to draw up some courage around something. Most of us have had moments like that in our lives, as I've said now a couple of times, but we don't really believe that it's a communication from the divine. So why it's important to talk about God is to help people who have dismissed the idea. It's just my imagination. No, it was just a coincidence, or serendipity. It was just it. But so that's why it's important, I think, for us all to talk about this, because then it helps people who have been dismissing the whole notion to embrace the idea as absolute reality. And that could expand humanity's understanding, not only of God, but of each other. Because the more we understand who and what God is, the more we will understand each other in a compassionate, caring, and a forgiving way.
Can you share one of the stories in your book?
I can, but I won't, because if I share the story, then people will have no reason to read the book. But, well, okay, I'll share this. There's a single mother who's heard from her own child. Her, 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 her she had questions that about life. She had lots of questions about what she should do. And her own child, her 6-year-old child, gave her an idea that she realized after it happened must have come directly from someplace outside. Because how would a 6-year-old child know what to even say about an adult problem like that? So yes, so one of the wonderful stories is the story of the mother whose child gave her advice. And of course, the mother decided that God was speaking to her through the child. And the child, all the child did was to tell her who to call. The child said, you should call this particular person. And it was a piece of brilliant advice. And the mother did call that person and got some help. So that's one of the many stories, one of the many wonderful stories. There's a story of a scientist whose conversation with the presence of God completely changed his life. But I think people will enjoy reading all the stories from other people. I don't want to give away the punchline, but there are wonderful stories of a teacher who is told how to be more effective in the classroom, and so many wonderful stories in the book.
So in God Talk, you share the 6 steps you do to talk with God. Step number 3 is defined as willingness. Now, what does this mean, and how can people be willing?
Well, let me go through all 6 steps very quickly so people can create a context within which to understand.
Okay.
The first step that I invite people to embrace is what I call possibility. People have to realize that it is possible that God would talk to us. Not everyone accepts that as off the top of their head. Not everyone accepts that. But so that's the first step. Okay, I agree that it's possible that God could be talking directly to me. Step number 2 is worthiness. That's why I brought up as a joke earlier, who's worthy and who's not, because we have to all agree that, okay, maybe God does talk to human beings, and I am worthy of God talking directly to me. Then step number 3, willingness. And willingness means that we have to be willing to do something that our culture has a bias against. That is, most of the human species does not think that God talks directly to us. So if you walk around saying to people, yeah, God spoke to me this morning, they will, in fact, or they might, certainly they might ridicule you or marginalize you, and they might even suggest you go to see a psychiatrist if you say out loud that God is talking directly to you. But it's even worse than that, Amandeep. The world's religions, most of the world's major religions tell us directly that if we say out loud that God is talking directly to and through us, we are a blasphemer. We are a heretic. We are an apostate. We are committing an ecclesiastical sin. And in some countries, believe it or not, in some countries you can be killed. The church will sentence you, the religion will sentence you to death for claiming that God is talking directly to you. So, of course, we have to be willing to stand up and have the courage to embrace our experience, even though there's a huge religious and cultural bias that says such a thing can't happen. Step number 4 then is wakefulness. Once we are willing to say this is what's happening, we have to be awake and not let it go right past, in one ear and out the other, because we're not watching carefully. We're not looking at what's happening right in front of us. So stay awake and be awake to the messages that life is sending us from a higher source. Step number 5 is acceptance. And when we do receive a message from the divine, we shouldn't reject it and say, as I said earlier, it was just a coincidence, or it's just my imagination. In other words, don't write it off. Accept it for what it is and give it the importance that it deserves to have. And then finally, step number 6, discernment, to be able to tell the difference between communications from the divine and the messages we're receiving every day from 1,000 other sources, the internet, books we read, movies we watch, television programs. We're being inundated with messages all of our life. But we have to be able to discern the difference, to tell the difference between, and not fall into the trap of calling all of a sudden everything is a sign. It's a sign. The other day I was reaching into my pocket to get my car keys. And as I pulled my car keys out of my pocket, a dollar bill fell out of my pocket onto the street. And my mind said, it's a sign. God said I should take all the folding money out of my pockets and throw it on the ground. It's a sign. No, it's not a sign. It was an accident. So we have to make sure that we don't call everything a sign from God, a message from the divine. So that's what step 6 is, discernment, to be able to tell the difference.
I'm assuming in the book you do advise like how to tell the difference, because how do we have to have a practice? Like, should we be meditating? Should we be praying to God? Is there a practice we should be doing on a daily basis in order
No, the answer is no.
Okay.
Don't should on yourself. There's nothing we should be doing. You asked me, should we be meditating? Should we be praying? No, there's nothing we should be doing. All we are invited to do is stay open to the possibility that, number 1, God exists. Number 2, God talks directly to people. Number 3, God will talk directly to us. And then stay awake and receive the messages. Right now, this podcast might be a message. People who are listening to this very podcast might be saying to themselves, you know what? I'm glad I really heard this. I'm glad I heard this podcast today. This reminds me that I need to stay awake to messages that are coming to me from deep within myself, which is where God resides.
And how did you get on this path?
I was in a situation in my life where nothing was working. I was desperate. Desperation brought me to this place because my relationship was falling apart, my job, my occupation was falling apart, even my health was falling apart. I was in a car accident and I broke my neck in a car accident. And I could have died. People who suffer a broken neck often die because of spinal cord complications, but I survived without dying and without even being paralyzed. So it was amazing. But I faced a series of major incidents in my life. And then I finally called out to God. I wound up, I don't know whether you know my history, but I wound up living on the sidewalk for a year of my life because I lost my income. I lost my job. I had no income and I had nowhere to live. I lost my relationships. So I wasn't living with my former wife. And I was living in a little apartment on somebody's little apartment. And they evicted me because I couldn't pay the rent after 4 months. I lost my income. So then I wound up living on the street, sleeping on the concrete, begging people for quarters and half dollars so that by the end of the day I could put some food into my tummy. And so after a year of that, I finally called out to God. I finally got a little part-time job, just enough to afford a one-room, single-room apartment on top of somebody's garage. But at least I was out of the weather, and at least it had a bathroom so that I could use that. And so I was very angry about my life. And then I sat down one morning at 4:30 in the morning because I couldn't sleep. And I woke up and I wrote an angry letter to God. I found a yellow legal pad on the coffee table and I wrote excuse me, I wrote a very angry letter to God. And I said to God, what does it take to make life work? What have I done to deserve a life of such endless struggle? Somebody tell me the rules. I'll play, just give me the rule book. And that's when I began hearing God's voice in my mind. Neale, do you really want answers to these questions? Or are you just venting? And I said, yeah, I am venting, but if you've got answers, I sure as hell like to know what they are. And God said, you are sure as hell, Neale, about a lot of things, but wouldn't you rather be sure as heaven? And I said, okay, what's that supposed to be? And God gave me the answers to all the questions I had. And that became an ongoing conversation with God, which, by the way, I never thought anyone else would ever read. It never occurred to me that anyone would ever be privy to my personal conversation. But I was told in the conversation, you will make of this one day a book, and it will be accessed by many people. And that's when I thought, okay, now we'll find out whether this is real or whether this is being part of my imagination. Because if it's real, then maybe somebody will actually publish a book. But who would? No, nobody's going to really do that. Nobody's going to publish a book because a guy says he's talking to God. It's not going to happen. So I realized, this was a good test. So I sent my notes to a publisher on a dare. I was daring God. And believe it or not, they actually published the book. And it wound up selling a few copies.
So what advice would you give to someone who is experiencing what you went through at the age of 49? You lost, pretty much you were homeless. What if somebody is experiencing something like that or is homeless, what advice would you want to give them?
Number one, become clear on who you are. Do you think that you are your body? Or that you are your mind? Or are you clear that you are actually a spiritual being having a body and a mind, but that you're not really your mind and you're not really your body? You are a soul. So that's the first advice I would give them. Then I would invite them to use their soul as the source of their understanding of what is going on and why it's going on, and what the soul came to the realm of the spiritual, and then from the realm of the spiritual to the realm of the physical. Why did the soul come to the physical world? If you really are a spiritual being, why not stay in the realm of the spiritual? So I would advise them to pay attention to what your soul is telling you about why you're here, who you are, and what you can do to make the situation you're in serve the agenda of your soul. And the agenda of our soul, in my understanding, is evolution. We've come here to evolve, to become the next grandest version of who we really are, which is an individuation of divinity. I could, of course, be wrong about all of that, but that's my understanding.
So do you think you had to go, do you think you went through all that to be where you are now? Or if that not had happened, would you have been in a different place?
Well, there's no question about that. Obviously, I mean, that's obvious to anybody. If that all hadn't happened, I would be in a different place. Of course, I would be in a different place. But I don't think it was part of any master plan. I don't think God said, when I was born, you're going to write a book when you're 49 years old, and it's going to touch a bunch of people. I don't think that there is a plan for each individual in the universe, of which there are gazillion individual sentient beings. But I do think that God does place within every sentient being the power to create whatever reality they would like to experience of themselves.
Like, was your family religious or spiritual? Like, what was your life like while growing up?
Yes, my family was, I wouldn't say overtly religious, but we were Catholic. My parents raised me as a Catholic boy. My father went to church every Sunday religiously. My mother was in ill health, so she didn't go to church because she couldn't sit there in the pew or kneel on the kneeler for a long periods of time. So she was excused from going to church, but my father went to church every Sunday and took us with him, took myself and my brother with him to church every Sunday. So, and they enrolled me in a Catholic school. So I was born and raised as a Catholic. And I'm really glad that I was. I don't agree, as I grew older, I don't agree with all of the teachings of the Catholic doctrine, but I am at least glad that I was raised in an environment where I was convinced that there really is such a thing as God. It was a wonderful gift to be given as a child. But many of the other teachings of the church, I found myself questioning as I grew older. And the more I questioned, the more I strayed from the Catholic religion. And I realized that, at least in my heart, much of what I was being told did not seem to be true. To give you one example, I remember when I was 9 years old, the priest, our parish priest, would come into our classroom when I was in the third grade once a week to teach the children about the doctrines of the church. And one week he was teaching us about mortal sin, what he called mortal sin, and then venial sin, which is a smaller sin that you only go to purgatory for, but you don't go to hell for if you're not forgiven. But a mortal sin, he said, was a sin that if we're not forgiven, of course, we can go to confession and the priest can offer us absolution. But if we are not granted forgiveness by the priest on behalf of God, and if we were die in a state of sin, we go straight to hell. So I said to God, I said to the priest, I said, Father, can you give me an example of what a mortal sin would be? Because I was, a 9-year-old, I wanted to know. And I'm sure he was going to say, well, murder or stealing someone's life savings, or abusing a child, something horrible. He said, yes, it's a mortal sin if you miss Mass on Sunday. I said, what? It's a mortal sin if you miss church on 1 week of your life? He said, well, without a good excuse. If you have a good excuse, if you're, having to care for a sick parent, or if you're an adult and you're, have to work on Sunday to support your family, fair enough. But you can't just decide to go off and play a game of golf on Sunday and instead of going to church. If you do, and you die with that sin on your soul, you will be sent directly to hell. So now I'm being asked at the age of 9 to believe in a God who would send you to everlasting torture in the fires of hell for missing church one Sunday of your life without a good excuse. I thought, wow, talk about filling the pews with fear. But of course, the church also taught you that it was good to be a God-fearing man. We're all supposed to be God-fearing. So as I grew older, I began to wonder, why would God want us to be afraid of her? I don't understand. Why would she act that way? Why wouldn't he just forgive us, even if there was any need to forgive us? So, I kind of rejected some of the teachings of the Catholic Church. Then I explored other churches. I explored the Presbyterian religion. I looked at Judaism. I looked at some of the other religions of the world. I explored just a little bit Buddhism, which is not a religion, but it's a philosophy. But I just couldn't find my way to believe in a God, because most of those religions also taught about a place called hell, and you have to do certain things or not do certain things in order to stay out of hell. So I was having a hard time with that. So I kind of rejected religion altogether when I was around 35 or 40. But then, as you know from my story, when I was 49, I had my challenges that I was really facing. And then that's when I had my conversation with God. And God said, no, I exist. But you're right. Religions don't have the complete story. There's much wisdom in the world's religions, or they wouldn't have lasted this long. But they don't have the full story about God. And the full story is that God is loving, that God is not judgmental, condemning, or punishing. There's no such place as hell. God said, you made that all up. I mean, human beings made that whole story up. God will not send you to hell.
We create our hell and heaven on earth, right? While we're in this life. It's our
Yes,
choice.
yes. And there's no such place as hell. So I was told, of course, if I'm wrong about that, I'm obviously going straight to hell when I die.
So after we leave this body, where do we go? If there's
My understanding is we return to what I call the realm of the spiritual. There are three realms in my awareness in the kingdom of God: the realm of the physical, the realm of the spiritual, and the realm of pure being, which is the first two realms combined. So it's kind of like a triangle: the realm of pure being, the realm of the spiritual, and the realm of the physical. And we go from one to the other throughout eternity. So when we do the thing that people call die, we don't actually die. We don't cease to exist. We simply have a change of address. Our awareness returns to the realm of the spiritual, where we experience timelessness and eternal blissful love, the love of the divine all the time. All we experience is love, always. And then we have an opportunity to review our life. We have a life review our most recent life, and we have an invitation we receive to return to the realm of the physical through a process that we've come to call reincarnation. That allows us to decide if we want to stay in the realm of the physical in another lifetime, in another body.
So we have a choice to come back. It's not like some teachers are saying, based on your karma. Like if you leave the earth without fulfilling your desires, or, you created some kind of karma, you're coming right back. So you're saying we have a choice once we go,
Yes, and I was told by God in my conversation that there's no such thing as karma. Like hell, karma was another idea that human beings just made up in order to somehow justify what was happening. Why would we come back? Why would we ever, if we were in heaven, why would we ever come back to this crazy life? So human beings had to come up with a reason. Well, we have a karmic debt we have to pay off, or whatever. But God said, no, there's no such thing as karma. You made that all up also. You didn't come back here to pay off any karmic debt, but you did come back here to serve the agenda of your soul, which is to continue the process of your expansion and your evolution, that you might fully and freely demonstrate and express your true identity as an individual expression of God.
so we are all gods.
We are all individuations of the divine. We are each to God as a wave is to the ocean. The wave isn't the ocean. It's obviously an individual arising of the ocean, powerful and spectacular and beautiful. But when that expression is complete, the wave recedes back into the ocean from whence it came. So that's our relationship with God. We are each an individual expression of the divine, and we can express as much of the divine as we wish in any given lifetime. Some people have expressed the divine at a very, very high level. Jesus was one of them. Muhammad, bless his holy name, was one of them. Moses was one of them. Mother Mary was one of them. Hildegard of Bingen was one of them. Joan of Arc was one of them. Men and women through the centuries have expressed the divine at a very high level. And there are people on the earth right now, not just in history, but in today's world. There are many men and women who are expressing the divine at a very high level. I am not one of them, but at least I know the road that I'm on. At least I know the journey that I'm taking. At least I know what I would like to do. And it gives me an opportunity to make a choice from moment to moment about who I choose to experience myself as being.
So what has been the most important lesson you have learned in this lifetime?
Never go on podcasts hosted by a person named Amandeep, because she's going to ask you strange questions that you can't possibly answer. But aside from that major lesson, the other biggest lesson that I learned was seriously, to be serious just for a moment. Of course, I asked God the same question. What is the most important thing that I couldn't understand? And God said, well, there are two really important messages. Number one, we are all one. There is only one thing, and we are all part of the one thing there is. So there's no separation from each other. And I asked God, I don't understand. How can that be? How can that be? Surely we're separate from you. And God said, Neale, hold up your hand. So I held up my hand, and God said, are your fingers individual? I said, yeah, they're all individual. They have the individual appearance, the individual function. God said, are they separate from each other? I said, no, they're individual, but they're not separate. They're all part of the same hand. God said, oh, so individuality does not equal separation. I see. So that you are all individual expressions of the one thing there is, which is me. And I said, wow, you make it so simple to understand, God. And God said to me, well, if God can't make it simple, who can? And here's the second most important message. God said to me, Neale, your life is not about you. Your life is about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. But when you realize that, when you live in that way, you will come to an awareness that in the universal sense, your life really is about you, for the first reason that I gave you. There's only one of us in the room. Obviously, what you do to someone else or fail to do for someone else, you do or fail to do for yourself, because there's only one of us. Which is why every great spiritual teacher, each in their own way, has sent humanity the same message. Do unto others as you would have it done unto you. It's really quite simple.
Where do you see humanity going? As you can see right now, it feels like there's, a lot of division, a lot of hate, a lot of fear. Where do you see us going?
I think in the near future, all of us will have our own podcasts, and we'll all be calling ourselves Amandeep. And we will, wait a minute, maybe that's not where we're going. No, maybe. I suppose I should try to be serious for a moment. I see us moving in a direction where we come to realize finally and ultimately who we really are and why we're here. I think humanity is on the road to its own self-realization. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a process that will take a relatively long period of time. I don't mean thousands of years, but I was told probably another 25 or 30 more years if we can get there in the next 30 years. I was told this in the book Tomorrow's God. But I think that we are moving in a direction where we're finally going to see that the way we've been creating our lives as a community, as a species, has simply not worked. We've had armed conflict on this planet for all but 5% of recorded history. And we have created a world in which 8 human beings hold more wealth and resources than 1/2 the human race combined. And we think that's perfectly okay. And we have found it beneficial in our own lives, for some strange reason, to destroy the very environment in which we live. We say there's no real climate crisis, and we claim that scientists are making it all up. So I think that where we are going in the near future is that we are starting to see, okay, we've got to find a different way to coexist. This is simply not working. And I think that more and more people will come to that realization, and that we will be reaching what sociologists call critical mass, the number of people that it takes for an entire species to shift its reality and to move in an entirely different direction.
So the more people are self-realized, the faster we'll get there.
Precisely. And and critical mass, most people don't understand that critical mass is not like 51% of the people. It's not even 30%. It's not even 10%. Critical mass sociologists tell us critical mass, the number of people it takes to turn an entire species around, believe it or not, is between 2.5 and 5% of the whole number. And so we're very close to reaching that. All we need are a few more idea heroes and a few more teachers and messengers who are willing to write a few more books and give a few more speeches and do a few more podcasts like you're doing. And I've been having some fun with you about it, but thank you, to be serious. Thank you, Amandeep, for what you're doing, because you're an idea hero. You're someone who's willing to do something about changing people's minds, or at least opening people's minds to the possibility that there might be a different way to experience ourselves as human beings.
Any final words from you or God?
Allow yourself to understand that all of us are holy, all of us are sacred, and all of us are worth being loved. Love everyone. Forgive no one. Never forgive anybody for the rest of your life. Understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master. When we understand how a person could behave the way they're behaving, then we no longer need to forgive them, which is why God does not forgive us for anything, because God cannot be hurt or damaged, injured or upset in any way. Certainly not by us, by a species as immature as we are, or frankly by anything, because God is the highest power in the universe. So we are to God as a 2-year-old might be to us. We don't have to forgive a 2-year-old for acting like a 2-year-old, because we understand how a 2-year-old would behave in that particular way. And if the 2-year-old spills the milk at the dining room table, Grandpa doesn't say to the 2-year-old, "It's okay, sweetheart. Grandpa forgives you." Of course not. Because Grandpa understands that forgiveness is not part of the equation. What does Grandpa say to the 2-year-old? Not "I forgive you," but
It's okay.
"It's all okay. Everything's fine." The grandpa comforts the child in the moment of her dismay, even as God comforts us when we make mistakes, even if they're big mistakes. All of us go to heaven.
Thank you so much, Neale. That was beautiful.
Thank you, Amandeep.